Hello and welcome to the only YouTube channel dedicated 100% to the best and brightest UK DFS platform out there, the Fantasy Gameday app. They have done incredible work again, launched a new product. This week they have launched the higher budget. They've got the entire Sunday slate and the Monday slate included, plus an extra £10,000. If you haven't tried it out, you can use code TFS23 for a free second entry when you deposit. Tom, this new game, higher budget, extra games on the slate, does it change how you would approach that to a normal kind of 40k budget?
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously, you can probably squeeze an extra stud in, but I think what we kind of see in these situations when you start removing salary cap from games or you start loosening it, is that quite often it's the players, to borrow a term from my friends, the Badge Bros, the scroll the F down players, the players who aren't getting drafted as much, who can be huge difference makers. And in this week, there seems to be lots of value at the running back position. I think that there's plenty of value at wide receiver in the kind of low 5,000 range. That if you're overlooking that, maybe that's what stops you winning big. But I definitely think it's a fun new wrinkle.
Yeah, I think it's definitely something that you can have a play around with, and certainly it's some interesting builds throwing some studs in that lineup. Though we are going to talk through the main slate, the main Sunday Stars games. We're going to, of course, start with the all-important captain picks. Tom, have you got a preference with how you're attacking your captain picks? Feels like we always talk about running back versus wide receiver this week. Have you got a particular lean this week?
Yeah, for me, it's the running back position. I think that this is a better running back slate than a wide receiver one. I really like the top guys, like, your Derrick Henry, Joe Mixon, Chase Brown, Alvin Kamara. But I also like a lot of the guys behind that, whether it's Chuba Hubbard and Rico Dowdle. And basically, I just want as many of those running backs in a lineup as possible. And if that means putting one in the captain position, one in the flex position, and then two other running back slots, that feels like a good start.
Absolutely. We're going to start with the wide receiver position, though. Jamar Chase, fresh off another phenomenal slate breaking game last week. £8,600 on this week's slate. That is very expensive. Does that turn you off the potential? He is £400 more expensive than any other player on the slate.
No, it doesn't. And, what we've seen from him has just been absolutely unreal. Week 14 was Jamar Chase's fifth career game with at least 10 catches, 175 yards, and 2 touchdowns. No one else in NFL history has more than that. Like, he is just an absurd player. We get these games where it becomes a T. Higgins week and it becomes harder to trust Jamar Chase, but the ceiling is so much higher with Jamar Chase. The Titans, they are a well-coached secondary. They rank 15th against the pass, though. You can get them, and I just don't think that they'll be strong enough to stop the Bengals. And the Bengals, every week is a must-win game. Like, they need to get this one. They need to get basically just keep winning to have any chance of making the playoffs.
Yeah, absolutely. Moving across, though, to a running back, Joe Mixon. Now, this is one of the best values on the slate for me. I think this matchup against the Miami defense, which has been a little bit hit and miss and is still pretty beat up. A lot of guys still on IR. Joe Mixon, we've seen when he gets going, this offense is completely different. Priced at £7,600, a little bit cheaper than some of those other more expensive running backs at the position. Will you be captaining Joe Mixon at all this week?
Yeah, definitely open to it. And, you kind of touched on a lot of it. The Miami defense, they are slightly stronger against the pass. They rank 20th against the pass in DVOA compared to 24th in run defense DVOA. They've allowed the 12th most fantasy points to opposing running backs this year, whereas they've only allowed the 29th most wide receiver fantasy points. So much easier to get them with running back position. Joe Mixon, when you start looking at how many games he's had impressive efforts this year, he has had over 100 total yards in 7 games this year. He's scored touchdowns in 8 games this year. He has been a top 8 running back in 7 games this year, only the 3 games outside of the top 12. It's just, that's the kind of reliability that we want. The Texans are at home. I'd lean into that.
Yeah, of course. And it's a big Derrick Henry week, it feels, last week. You talked on our main show on the other channel about how good Derrick Henry has been in December. And it feels like this could be a Ravens game where they just feed Derrick Henry as much as he can handle, and he could break open this slate.
Yeah, very much so. And I think you're kind of hoping that Derrick Henry could get there early to a point where he just sets up a nice, comfortable lead and really scores a lot of points. To the point you were making about the point I was making over on the main channel. In 31 career December games, Derrick Henry's rushed for 2,769 yards on 545 carries. That's 5.1 yards per carry. He also has 30 touchdowns in December alone, which is an absurd number. The Ravens have been quite careful with how they've managed Derrick Henry this year. He's had over 20 touches in just 6 games. He's been below that, but he's been efficient. This is a guy who has scored touchdowns in all but 2 games this year. The next time that he scores a touchdown, he's going to set a franchise record for the Ravens. And there's been games where he's just gone nuclear. 35 fantasy points is the ceiling kind of outcomes for him. I think that against the Giants, who are terrible against the run, they allow the third highest yards per carry, the third most rushing yards per game. They allow the seventh most fantasy points to opposing running backs. And it's just been miserable for them, and they are completely beat up. They are really struggling across the field, and I think that Derrick Henry is probably my favorite captain pick, but of course, I would say that.
Shock, shock. I think it's a really interesting play. I think you can certainly talk yourself into a scenario in a game script where Derrick Henry absolutely feasts. We're going to talk about some stacks of the week, though. Tom, is a stack when you're building your lineup something that you absolutely must have in every single game, or will there be scenarios where you potentially move away from a stack?
I mean, you can look at somebody like Jalen Hurts and say, do I need to stack Jalen Hurts? And maybe not over the last few weeks because he gets cheek sneaks and all that and ends up with the touchdowns himself rather than passing the ball. But typically, there's normally going to be at least one pass catcher who gets home on with the QB, and particularly with the way that things are priced on Fantasy Game Day, it's not something that I want to shy away from. I would rather build around running backs first and then find a stack that can help me get different, or find a stack that's going to help me really go to the top of the leaderboard if that game environment hits. And some weeks it doesn't work. Like, I think it's been a couple of weeks since I placed now, but then on the weeks where it did work, I had several weeks in a row where I was close to the top, and that's what I'll lean into.
Yeah, and one of the, I guess, cheaper stacks that you would probably expect, we've got the Dallas stack. Cooper Rush, base minimum price at 4,200. CD Lamb, yes, your eyes aren't deceiving you. £5,800 on this week's slate. Spending 10K on a stack, Tom, is this sort of a cheaper, slightly different stack that you could potentially talk yourself into?
Yeah, I can get by with this, particularly because what I want to do with the running back position this weekend and really try to prioritize that. CD Lamb over his last 4 games has been the wide receiver 14, 14, 69, and 11. He's scored over 16 fantasy points in 3 of those 4 games, which we can live with at 5,800. And if he's carrying Cooper Rush along the way, if he scores a touchdown, as well as putting up sort of 70, 80 yards, then there's probably been enough fantasy production to make it worthwhile. Obviously, the Cowboys are playing against the Panthers, who are a bad defense, ranked 29th against the pass. CD Lamb, incredible talent. We're not going to get the kind of blow up games we got when Dak was there. We're not seeing quite as strong usage as we would like. He's only had a 22% target share over his last 4 games, which is why I wouldn't be captaining CD Lamb. But I think stacking him around a running back with a higher ceiling for this week works completely.
Yeah, absolutely. And then in that same matchup, we've got the Titans defense, Titans stack. All 3 players feel slightly undervalued for me right now. You got Will Levis at 4.6, Ridley at 4.8, and Tony Pollard at 6,000. Is this one that you could potentially talk yourself into? We talked in our playoff preview show about how good this run of games is for Will Levis. Can he finally deliver for us, Tom?
Yeah, and we were high on it last week, and it didn't work out for us against the Jags in a matchup that it should have. But I think that's just going to force more people away from Will Levis. Last week, Will Levis was a bit of a trendy pick, and it busted, and it hurt a lot of people. It hurt me. So now we can go back to the well against the Bengals pass defense that ranks 30th in DVOA. They allow the 3rd most QB fantasy points, the 12th most wide receiver, the 20 most to running back, but they still rank 26th on run defense DVOA, so I'm not worried about that. Calvin Ridley's averaged a 37% target share over the last 4 weeks. Nobody else on the Titans is over 12%, so I think you either play this through Levis and Ridley, or you play it through Pollard, who we've seen gets enough volume, and you can definitely attack the Bengals on the ground. Even the only worry would be that the Bengals push this into a more pass-heavy script, and then Pollard doesn't see quite enough volume.
Yeah, and the Ravens were on bye last week, so of course we've got to talk about the Baltimore Ravens this week. Tom, do you fancy a Lamar blow-up game? We talked about Derrick Henry in the top potentially having huge volume. Do you think there's going to be enough around for this stack to potentially hit as well?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I was looking through ownership projections for DraftKings and FanDuel for this week, and Lamar and Flowers and Andrews are all coming in sub 10%. And whenever that happens, I want exposure to him because we know how high their ceiling is. The Giants will have third highest completion rate on throws 20 plus yards downfield over the last 4 weeks. Zay Flowers has been money downfield all season. Lamar currently has the highest passer rating and touchdown percentage of any quarterback in the league. The Giants are completely beat up. They just placed their starting safety, who was their round 2 pick this year, on IR. I just don't understand how the Giants are supposed to stop the Ravens. The Ravens are favored by 16, which is the largest spread of the season. And if nobody wants to play this, then it's one which I'll go to.
Makes a lot of sense. Sometimes you've got to be comfortable being uncomfortable and get a little bit different. Some of our favorite plays on the week, though, Chase Brown. This is almost an absolute must for me. 7,200. He's one of the best values on the entire slate. I think you can talk into potentially captaining him. But I think if you're looking for some value, there's a couple of decent value options we will talk through later. And that could potentially walk you into a captain and then Chase Brown in one of those running back slots. Do you think this could be a huge game for Chase Brown?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Chase Brown has just been excellent ever since the point where Zach Moss got injured. Chase Brown has just been balling every single week. You go back and he's like RB3 over the last few weeks now. The Titans are a better run defense than they are a pass defense. They rank 9th in run defense, but you can get at them because they tire down, because they just struggle to keep up with opposing teams. And Chase Brown has been working in the passing game. He's been working in the ground game. When somebody gets that, and when they're getting sort of 20 touches a week, there's just no reason to fade them.
No, absolutely. And then another, I guess this is slightly different. So I'm projecting that potentially Lab McConkey doesn't play. I think if he doesn't, you can absolutely talk yourself into Quentin Johnson at £4,000. Tom, is this a little bit too thin for you, or could you get on board with Quentin Johnson as a potential option this week?
Yeah, I can get on board with it because the Bucks' defense is really poor. Antoine Winfield's going to be missing for a few weeks, and they allow their 10th most wide receiver fantasy points even with Winfield in the lineup. They rank 21st in defensive DVOA. They are not a good team in the back end. And look, Quentin Johnson's always going to be a divisive figure. He's always going to have his ups and downs, but at 4K, I'd be fine with it in a game which has plenty of potential for fantasy points.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And then the final key play for me, we're going to look at the tight end position. Travis Kelce feels very cheap, feels very reasonable that he could get maybe 3, if not 4 times that price. Do you think that Travis Kelce, we've seen him put on ice slightly the last few weeks, I think, so they're looking towards the playoffs. Could this be a good Travis Kelce week?
Yeah, on paper, the Browns allow the 8th most fantasy points of the tight end position. They've not been particularly good against them. They've not been particularly good on defense, full stop. They rank 25th against the pass this year. They don't seem to be able to get it done. It just kind of comes down to how well does Patrick Mahomes play? We've seen Patrick Mahomes at times this year look really good. And then it's been up and down. It's up and down. Like last week, Travis Kelce, I think he was double covered consistently. Or was it Derwin James who shadowed him for a huge amount of the game? And that kind of really made it difficult for him. But this offense, it's Travis Kelce, it's DeAndre Hopkins, Xavier Worthy, and Noah Gray. Out of them, I think each and every week, the odds are going to be massively in favor of Travis Kelce seeing the highest volume. If he doesn't get the touchdowns, it's going to hurt. But I think that on this slate with Travis Kelce there, you've got Brock Bowers off the main slate. It makes it a lot easier for a guy to get there on just receptions alone.
Yeah, no, absolutely makes a lot of sense. Now we're going to move across to the key enablers. Tom, This week feels a little bit more balanced in terms of there's some potential value at the wide receiver position. You talked about CeeDee Lamb being cheaper. Calvin Ridley's only at 4,800. Someone like Elijah Moore's at £4,000. Does that mean that the enablers are less likely to be finding their way into your lineup, or do you think there's some guys that you want to start no matter what?
Yeah, my first instinct is that I want to be a little more balanced this week. Last week was the week where you would try to slam in Saquon Barkley and Alvin Kamara no matter what, a captain spot, and then work it out from there. This week, the running back values to me, when I look at Rico Dowdle, when I look at Brian Robinson, when I look even at Chase Brown, who's possibly a little more expensive, but then also I think that there's enough there that I'll probably try and aim to be a little more balanced than I am most weeks.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Well, let's dive in some of those key enablers. Isaiah Davis, it's looking like Brees Hall's not going to play. Isaiah Davis was pretty much a 50-50 split with Braden Allen last week, but did see that receiving usage. We talked, Tom, about these guys potentially targeting 8 points when they're priced at 2,200. That feels very much in the realm of possibilities with Isaiah Davis. Is he an enabler that will be finding his way into your lineup?
It's kind of tricky when you look at these running backs and these backfield splits. And this is what this backfield split was. Braylon Allen, 56% snap rate, Isaiah Davis, 52%. There were 11 rush attempts for Allen, 10 to Davis, 21 routes for Allen, 19 to Davis. You're really just looking at who gets the touchdowns. And that is always going to be a volatile thing to bet on. But against the Jags, who had just a terrible run defense, will have a second most fantasy points to the running back position. Yeah, I don't mind taking bets on Isaiah Davis at all. I think that he can absolutely get there.
Yeah, and then another running back in the split backfield, Kamani Vidal. We saw him last week cross the 50% snap share for the first time in his career. He played 32 of 60 snaps. He did only see a 44% running back rush share, with Gus Edwards seeing more carries. But interestingly, Kamani Vidal did lead the running back room in routes, running 17. Do you think this Chargers offense, with how bad Gus Edwards has looked, could lead more into the Kamani Vidal world, and therefore at £2,200 could be a potential 60-70% snap share guy that could be great value?
Yeah, and I think that a lot of Kamani Vidal's touches last week came in the second half. It was like after the half time, they seemed like they were kind of a little bit more done with Gus Edwards and we wanted to lean into Vidal at that point. So maybe that is an indicator that they're finally realizing that Gus just isn't able to get it going this year. I, for one, think that at 2,200, Vidal is fine. I wouldn't be starting him in normal fantasy matchups. The Chargers haven't managed to hit 100 total rushing yards ever since J.K. Dobbins got injured. But 2,200 against the Bucks, who they're a good run defense, they're top 12, but I think that you can get there easy enough.
Yeah, and then the final guy we're going to talk about as a key enabler, you shouted him out last week. He scored a touchdown. Do you think Grant Calcaterra could potentially repeat this week?
Yeah, I mean, 2,200, he's in the game plan. We know that Kellen Moore over the years, when he was with the Cowboys, when he was with the Chargers, that he likes to use tight ends as part of their game plan. And obviously, the Steelers are not an easy team to pass on, but the one position that they give the most fantasy points to is the tight end position. They rank 14th in DVOA against them. They allow 40th most fantasy points to the tight end position. So, look, Calcaterra, all he needs is a touchdown, really. He's only had one touchdown in 2 or 3 years in the league, but with no Dallas Goedert, I'm fine going back to the well here.
Absolutely. When you've only scored one touchdown in 2-3 years, why not back-to-back weeks? It makes perfect sense, doesn't it?
Why not?
If you haven't played the Fantasy Gameday app, don't forget you can use the code TFS23 for a second free entry. They've got everything you need. They've got early slate games, late slate games. They've, of course, got the ballers for Thursday Night Football, Sunday Night Football, and Monday Night Football. They've got the traditional Sunday stars at multiple different price points, and they've got that big new high budget game that they have just dropped this week. Go ahead and check it out. It is the fastest growing DFS platform just for you UK listeners and viewers. Of course, we'll be back next week previewing next week's slate. But this week, have a good one and best of luck.